The essay landed on the desk with a loud slap. Mrs. Catherine Moore stood in front of the classroom with her arms crossed. Her eyes were fixed on 16-year-old Sarah Chen, who sat in the back row wearing a faded jacket that was 2 sizes too big. "This is impossible," Mrs. Moore said loudly. "There is absolutely no way you wrote this essay by yourself." The entire class turned to look at Sarah. Some students whispered to each other. Others took out their phones. Sarah felt her face getting hot. "But I did write it, Mrs. Moore. I spent 3 weeks working on it." Her voice was quiet but clear. Mrs. Moore laughed. It was not a kind laugh. "3 weeks? Sarah, let me be honest with you. Students from your background simply do not produce work at this level. I have been teaching English for 20 years. I know plagiarism when I see it." The word plagiarism hung in the air like a weapon. Sarah stood up from her desk. "I did not copy anything. I can explain every single point in that essay. I can show you my research notes. I can—" "Sit down," Mrs. Moore interrupted. "I am sending you to the principal's office." "We take academic dishonesty very seriously at Riverside Prep Academy." She picked up the essay and held it up for the class to see. "Let this be a lesson to all of you. Integrity matters more than grades." As Sarah walked out of the classroom, she heard the whispers growing louder behind her. Her scholarship to Riverside Prep was the only reason she could attend this expensive private school. Her mother worked as a cleaner at 3 different office buildings to support Sarah and her 2 younger brothers. Every night, Sarah studied while her brothers slept. She read books from the public library. She wrote and rewrote her essays until they were perfect. The essay Mrs. Moore had just destroyed was about education inequality in America. Sarah had interviewed her mother about working multiple jobs. She had researched statistics about poverty and school funding. She had poured her heart into every word, and now her teacher was calling her a cheater in front of everyone. In the principal's office, Sarah tried to explain. Principal Roberts listened, but his face showed doubt. "Sarah, Mrs. Moore is one of our most respected teachers. She has never been wrong about these things before. Are you absolutely certain you did not receive help from someone else?" Sarah felt tears burning in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "I am certain, sir. I wrote every single word myself." Principal Roberts sighed. "I am going to need to investigate this. Until then, you are suspended from class. We will contact your mother." Sarah left the school that day knowing that everyone thought she was a liar. The scholarship students always had to prove themselves twice as hard, and now she had failed. Sarah walked home in the rain. Her phone buzzed constantly in her pocket, but she ignored it. When she finally looked at the screen, she saw dozens of messages from classmates. Most of them were not supportive. "Did you really cheat?" one message asked. Another said, "I always knew scholarship kids didn't belong here." Someone had created a group chat called Academic Dishonesty Watch and added her to it. Then Sarah saw the video. Someone had recorded the entire confrontation in Mrs. Moore's classroom. The video showed Mrs. Moore accusing her of plagiarism. It showed Sarah trying to defend herself. It showed the moment Mrs. Moore held up the essay like evidence of a crime. The video had been posted on the school's social media page. It already had 300 views. Sarah's younger brother Michael opened the front door when she arrived home. "Mom got a call from your school," he said. His face was worried. "She had to leave work early. She's really upset." Their mother, Linda Chen, sat at the kitchen table with her work uniform still on. Her eyes were red. When she saw Sarah, she stood up quickly. "Tell me the truth, Sarah. Did you cheat on that essay?" "No, Mom. I promise I didn't. I wrote it myself. Mrs. Moore just doesn't believe me because—" Sarah stopped. She didn't want to say the words out loud. "Because we're poor," Linda finished. Her voice was tired. "Because you're a scholarship student. Because your mother cleans toilets for a living." Sarah nodded. The tears finally came. "I worked so hard on that essay, Mom. It was about us, about how hard you work, about education inequality, and she just threw it away like it was garbage." Linda pulled Sarah into a hug. "I believe you, baby. I know how hard you study. I see you every night with those books." She pulled back and looked at Sarah's face. "But this school, maybe it's not the right place for you. Maybe we should look at public school options." "No," Sarah said firmly. "I'm not letting her win." I'm not giving up my scholarship because one teacher is cruel. But even as she said the words, Sarah wondered if staying was worth the fight. The next day, the video had spread beyond Riverside Prep. It was shared on education forums and parent groups. Some people defended Mrs. Moore, saying teachers have the right to question suspicious work. Others pointed out that Mrs. Moore had a history of treating scholarship students differently than wealthy students. The comment sections became battlegrounds. Sarah's mother had to take off work to meet with Principal Roberts and Mrs. Moore. Sarah brought her research notes, her drafts, her library records, showing every book she had checked out. She explained her writing process step by step. Mrs. Moore sat with her arms crossed the entire time. Her face showed no emotion. Even if she did write it, Mrs. Moore finally said, the question remains whether she had inappropriate assistance. Perhaps a tutor, a parent, someone at the library. She looked directly at Linda. No offense, Mrs. Chen, but given your educational background, I find it hard to believe your daughter developed these skills at home. Linda's hands gripped the armrest of her chair. Her voice shook when she spoke. I may clean offices for a living, Mrs. Moore, but I taught my daughter to work hard and never give up. Something you clearly don't understand. Principal Roberts cleared his throat. After reviewing Sarah's evidence, I am prepared to accept that she wrote the essay herself. The plagiarism charge will be dropped from her record. He looked at Mrs. Moore. However, given the tension that has developed, I think it would be best if Sarah transferred to a different English class. No, Mrs. Moore said quickly. I don't think that's necessary. Sarah and I can move forward professionally. But her eyes said something different. They said Sarah would never be forgiven for making her look wrong. Sarah knew the truth in that moment. Even though the official accusation was dropped, everyone at Riverside Prep would always remember the video. They would always wonder if she really cheated. The wealthy students would use it as proof that scholarship kids didn't belong. The teachers would watch her more carefully, always suspicious. That night, Sarah made a decision. She would finish the semester at Riverside Prep to keep her scholarship record clean. But then she would transfer to Lincoln High, the public school in her neighborhood. She would not let Mrs. Moore's cruelty define her future. Her mother tried to talk her out of it. You worked so hard to get into Riverside. The opportunity's there, Linda started. The opportunities are only good if people treat you with respect, Sarah interrupted. Mrs. Moore showed me something important, Mom. She showed me exactly the kind of teacher I never want to become. An idea was forming in Sarah's mind, a long-term plan that would take years to complete. Sarah spent the rest of her time at Riverside Prep in silence. She stopped raising her hand in class. She did her work perfectly but never went beyond the minimum requirement. Mrs. Moore seemed satisfied with this arrangement. She gave Sarah B grades on everything, never an A no matter how good the work was. Sarah documented everything. On her last day at Riverside Prep, Sarah walked past Mrs. Moore's classroom one final time. The teacher was laughing with a group of wealthy students, helping them with their college essays. She didn't even glance at Sarah. That was fine. Sarah had already decided that one day when she had the power and position to make a difference, she would make sure no other student ever felt the way Mrs. Moore had made her feel. At Lincoln High, Sarah flourished. The teachers there recognized her talent immediately. Her English teacher, Mr. Jackson, read her essay about education inequality and asked if he could share it with his college professor friends. This is university-level analysis, he told her. You have a real gift, Sarah. For the first time in months, Sarah felt seen. She joined the debate team. She started a tutoring program for younger students. She wrote article after article about education reform, and every single day she remembered Mrs. Moore's face when she called her a cheater. That memory became fuel for her ambition. Sarah graduated from Lincoln High as valedictorian. She gave a speech about perseverance and proving people wrong. Her mother and brother sat in the front row, crying with pride. Sarah had been accepted to State University with a full scholarship. She was going to study education. In college, Sarah worked 2 part-time jobs while maintaining perfect grades. She volunteered at underprivileged schools on weekends. She wrote her undergraduate thesis on implicit bias in academic settings. The thesis won a national award. Graduate schools competed to offer her scholarships. Sarah chose Columbia University for her master's degree in education policy. In New York, She interned at nonprofit organizations that fought for education equality. She met other educators who had similar experiences with discrimination. Together, they researched and published papers about bias in elite private schools. Her doctoral dissertation focused on how teachers' expectations affect student outcomes. She used her own experience at Riverside Prep as a case study, though she changed the names. The dissertation became the foundation for a new teacher training program. The program taught educators how to recognize their own biases and support students from all backgrounds equally. By the time Sarah was 26 years old, she had a PhD from Columbia, 3 published books on education reform, and a national reputation as an expert on inclusive teaching methods. School districts across the country were adopting her curriculum. She received job offers from prestigious institutions every month. Sarah's methods worked. Schools that implemented her programs saw dramatic improvements. Students from poor backgrounds performed better, dropout rates decreased, college acceptance rates increased. Sarah became known as the educator who could transform struggling schools into success stories. Throughout those 10 years, Sarah never forgot Riverside Prep Academy. She followed the school's news online. She saw that enrollment was dropping. Parents were complaining that the school was too traditional and not diverse enough. The school's reputation was suffering. A new headmaster had been hired to modernize the institution and improve its image. When Sarah saw the job posting for Director of Academic Innovation at Riverside Prep Academy, she smiled. The position would oversee all academic departments. The director would report directly to the headmaster. The director would have the authority to evaluate and replace department heads if necessary. It was perfect. Sarah applied for the job using her married name, Sarah Martinez. She had gotten married 2 years earlier to a fellow educator named Carlos. The name change meant her application would not immediately connect to her history at Riverside. She wanted to get into the interview room first. Her credentials were impressive. Columbia PhD published author, award-winning curriculum designer, proven track record of transforming schools. The interview committee invited her immediately. Sarah accepted. She did not ask who would be on the interview panel. She didn't need to. She already knew that Mrs. Catherine Moore was the head of the English department. After 10 years, Sarah was going home. Sarah walked into Riverside Prep Academy wearing a professional Navy suit. The building looked exactly the same as she remembered. The marble floors still gleamed. The trophy cases still lined the hallways. The portraits of former headmasters still watched from the walls. But Sarah was different. She was no longer the scared 16-year-old in the too big jacket. The interview was scheduled in the main conference room. Headmaster David Chen greeted her at the door. He was new to Riverside, hired just 6 months ago to reform the school's outdated culture. Dr. Martinez, welcome. We are very excited to meet you. Your work in education reform is exactly what Riverside needs. Sarah shook his hand firmly. Thank you, Headmaster Chen. I'm excited to learn more about the position. She walked into the conference room and saw the interview panel. 5 people sat at the long table. She recognized 3 of them from her time as a student. And there at the end of the table sat Mrs. Catherine Moore. Mrs. Moore looked older. Her hair was gray now instead of brown. She wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She studied Sarah's resume with a slight frown. She did not recognize Sarah. 10 years and a different last name had erased Sarah from her memory. Sarah was just another job candidate. The interview began with standard questions. Sarah answered each one with confidence and detailed examples. She discussed her curriculum design philosophy. She explained her research on teacher bias. She described successful programs she had implemented at other schools. The panel members nodded and took notes. Mrs. Moore remained quiet, but her frown deepened. Dr. Martinez, Headmaster Chen said, your approach to education seems very progressive. How would you handle resistance from faculty who are used to traditional methods? He glanced at Mrs. Moore as he asked the question. Sarah looked directly at Mrs. Moore for the first time. Change is always difficult, especially for educators who have been teaching the same way for many years. But research shows that teacher expectations directly impact student outcomes. When teachers have low expectations for certain students based on their background or appearance, those students perform worse. Not because they lack ability, but because they are not given the same opportunities or support. Mrs. Moore's frown turned into a scowl. That's a rather broad generalization, Dr. Martinez. I have been teaching for 30 years. I treat all my students equally regardless of their background. Sarah smiled politely. I'm sure you believe that, Mrs. Moore. But unconscious bias affects all of us. That's why ongoing training and accountability measures are so important. Teachers need regular evaluation and feedback to ensure they're serving all students fairly. Are you suggesting that experienced teachers don't know how to do their jobs? Mrs. Moore's voice had an edge to it now. I'm suggesting that education must evolve, Sarah replied calmly. Methods that worked 20 or 30 years ago may not serve today's diverse student body. A good educator is always learning and adapting. The tension in the room was clear. The other panel members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Headmaster Chen intervened. Dr. Martinez, can you tell us about a time when you personally experienced or witnessed educational inequality? How did that experience shape your work? This was the moment Sarah had been waiting for. Actually, Headmaster Chen, I attended Riverside Prep Academy as a student. I was here on scholarship 10 years ago. The room went completely silent. Mrs. Moore's head snapped up from the resume. Her eyes widened as she stared at Sarah's face. Recognition slowly dawned. Wait, Mrs. Moore said slowly. Sarah Chen. You're Sarah Chen. Yes, Mrs. Moore. I was in your English class. You accused me of plagiarism on an essay about education inequality. You told me that students from my background don't produce work at that level. You sent me to the principal's office and had me suspended. Sarah's voice was calm and professional. She stated the facts without emotion. Mrs. Moore's face turned pale, then red. That was a long time ago. There was a misunderstanding about... There was no misunderstanding, Sarah interrupted gently. You saw a poor scholarship student submit excellent work, and you refused to believe I wrote it myself. You humiliated me in front of the entire class. Someone recorded the whole thing. The video went viral at the school. She turned to address the entire panel. That experience taught me something valuable. It taught me exactly what kind of educator I never wanted to become. Headmaster Chen leaned forward. I was not aware of this history. Dr. Martinez, or should I say Dr. Chen, this must be complicated for you. My married name is Martinez, but yes, I was Sarah Chen. And it's not complicated at all, Headmaster. It's actually very simple. I experienced educational discrimination firsthand. That experience drove me to get my PhD and dedicate my career to making sure other students don't suffer the same treatment. Everything I've accomplished in the past 10 years stems from what happened in Mrs. Moore's classroom. Another panel member, the math department head, spoke up. This is quite remarkable. You've turned a negative experience into an incredible career. Your credentials are outstanding, Dr. Martinez. But can you work effectively at a school where you had such a painful experience? Sarah nodded. I can, because I don't hold grudges against institutions. I hold them accountable. Riverside Prep has an opportunity to transform itself into a truly inclusive school. But that transformation requires honest evaluation of past practices. It requires acknowledging where the school has failed students like me. And it requires leadership that won't tolerate discrimination. Mrs. Moore stood up abruptly. I think I should recuse myself from this interview. There's clearly a conflict of interest here. Her hands were shaking. Please sit down, Mrs. Moore, Headmaster Chen said firmly. We need all department heads present for this decision. Dr. Martinez has not expressed any personal animosity. She's simply stating facts about her experience here. Mrs. Moore sat down slowly. She wouldn't look at Sarah. The rest of the interview continued for another 30 minutes. Sarah answered every question with expertise and confidence. She presented her vision for Riverside Prep's academic future. She outlined specific programs she would implement. She discussed timeline and budget considerations. At the end, Headmaster Chen asked one final question. Dr. Martinez, if we offer you this position, you would be supervising all department heads, including Mrs. Moore. How would you handle that professional relationship? Sarah looked directly at Mrs. Moore. The same way I would handle any professional relationship, with clear expectations, regular evaluations, and objective assessment of performance. Personal history doesn't matter. What matters is whether each educator is effectively serving all students with fairness and respect. If they are, they have nothing to worry about. If they're not, we'll work together to improve. And if improvement isn't possible, we'll make difficult decisions. Mrs. Moore's face showed pure panic now. She understood exactly what Sarah was saying. The interview panel excused Sarah to deliberate. She waited in the hallway outside the conference room. Through the door, she could hear raised voices. Mrs. Moore was clearly arguing against hiring her. The other voices were harder to make out. After 20 minutes, Headmaster Chen opened the door. "Dr. Martinez, please come back in." His expression was serious but not unfriendly. Sarah walked back into the conference room and took her seat. "Dr. Martinez, we have discussed your qualifications and your history with Riverside Prep. I want to be direct with you. Your credentials are exceptional. Your vision for education reform aligns perfectly with the direction this school needs to go. Your experience and expertise are exactly what we need." Headmaster Chen paused. "However, we have concerns about the personal history between you and Mrs. Moore." Mrs. Moore sat with her arms crossed, looking relieved. She thought she had won. Headmaster Chen continued. "Those concerns are not about you, Dr. Martinez. They are about whether Mrs. Moore can work effectively under your supervision, given what happened 10 years ago." He turned to look at Mrs. Moore. "Catherine, I need to ask you directly. Did the incident Dr. Martinez described actually happen the way she said?" Mrs. Moore hesitated. "There was an incident, yes. But it wasn't about discrimination. It was about academic integrity concerns that turned out to be unfounded. I apologized at the time." "You never apologize," Sarah said quietly. "Principal Roberts dropped the plagiarism charge, but you never admitted you were wrong. You gave me B grades on everything for the rest of the semester, no matter how good my work was. You made it clear I wasn't welcome in your classroom." Headmaster Chen made a note on his paper. "I see. Catherine, were there other students you treated similarly? Other scholarship students or students from disadvantaged backgrounds?" "Absolutely not," Mrs. Moore said firmly. "I have always treated all students fairly regardless of their background." "Then you won't mind if Dr. Martinez conducts a thorough review of student complaints and grade distributions in your classes over the past decade," Headmaster Chen said. It wasn't a question. "Dr. Martinez, we would like to offer you the position of Director of Academic Innovation, effective immediately. You will oversee all academic departments, including English. You will have full authority to evaluate teaching staff, implement new programs, and make recommendations about personnel decisions." Sarah felt something lift from her chest. 10 years of work had led to this moment. "Thank you, Headmaster Chen. I accept the position." Mrs. Moore stood up quickly. "This is outrageous. You're putting someone in charge who has a personal vendetta against me. This is a professional decision based on qualifications." Headmaster Chen interrupted. "Dr. Martinez has proven herself at multiple institutions. She has the expertise we need. Your personal discomfort with the situation does not override what's best for this school and its students." He looked at Mrs. Moore seriously. "Catherine, you have been a teacher here for 30 years. I hope you can continue that service. But that will depend on how well you adapt to the changes Dr. Martinez will implement." The meeting ended shortly after. Sarah shook hands with each panel member. Mrs. Moore did not offer her hand. She left the conference room quickly, her face red with anger and humiliation. Headmaster Chen walked Sarah to the exit. "Dr. Martinez, I want to be honest with you. This situation is not ideal. Mrs. Moore has allies on the faculty and among certain parent groups. There will be resistance to your authority, especially from people who have known her for years." "I understand," Sarah said, "but I didn't come here for revenge. I came here to fix a broken system. If Mrs. Moore is willing to adapt and truly serve all students fairly, she can keep her position. If not, the students deserve better." Sarah started her new position at Riverside Prep Academy 2 weeks later. Headmaster Chen had arranged a faculty meeting to introduce her. 120 teachers filled the auditorium. Sarah could feel the mix of curiosity and hostility in the room. Mrs. Moore sat in the back row with her arms crossed. "Good morning, everyone," Headmaster Chen began. "I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Sarah Martinez, our new Director of Academic Innovation. Dr. Martinez comes to us with impressive credentials from Columbia University. She has successfully implemented education reform programs at schools across the country. She will be working with each department to evaluate and improve our academic programs. Sarah stepped up to the microphone. She had prepared her speech carefully. Thank you, Headmaster Chen. I'm honored to join Riverside Prep. I want to be clear about my goals here. This school has a strong academic reputation, but there's room for improvement. Recent data shows declining enrollment, particularly among students from diverse backgrounds. Parent surveys indicate concerns about inclusivity and outdated teaching methods. My job is to address these issues. She clicked to the next slide on her presentation. Over the next 3 months, I will be conducting a comprehensive review of all academic departments. This will include classroom observations, student interviews, grade distribution analysis, and review of any complaints filed with the administration. I will also be implementing mandatory bias training for all faculty members. Murmurs spread through the auditorium. One teacher in the front row raised his hand. Dr. Martinez, are you suggesting that we discriminate against students? I'm suggesting that unconscious bias exists in all educational settings, Sarah replied. Research shows that teacher expectations significantly impact student performance. If we want to serve all students effectively, we need to examine our own assumptions and practices honestly. After the meeting, several teachers approached Sarah with support. Others avoided eye contact and left quickly. Mrs. Moore did not approach at all. She left through the side door with a group of older faculty members. Sarah watched them go. She knew this would be a long battle. Over the next few weeks, Sarah began her department reviews. She started with the science department and the math department. She observed classes and interviewed students. She looked at grade distributions and college acceptance rates. She found problems everywhere. Advanced classes had very few scholarship students. Teachers called on wealthy students more frequently. Recommendations for gifted programs favored students from prominent families. Sarah documented everything carefully. She met with department heads and showed them the data. Some were defensive at first, but most were willing to acknowledge the problems and work on solutions. She implemented new policies for class placement and teacher recommendations. She created mentorship programs to support scholarship students. Finally, it was time to review the English department. Sarah scheduled her observation of Mrs. Moore's class for a Tuesday morning. She arrived early and sat in the back of the classroom. Mrs. Moore saw her and her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. The class was Advanced English for Juniors. Sarah counted 22 students. 20 were white and from wealthy families based on the class roster. 2 were scholarship students, both sitting in the back corners. Sarah took notes. Mrs. Moore taught a lesson on literary analysis. She asked questions about the reading assignment. She called on students by name. Sarah tracked who she called on. In 45 minutes, Mrs. Moore called on wealthy students 18 times. She called on scholarship students 0 times. When one scholarship student raised her hand, Mrs. Moore looked right past her. Sarah's observation report was damning. She documented not just the biased calling pattern, but also Mrs. Moore's body language, her tone when speaking to different students, and the way she arranged the classroom seating. Scholarship students were systematically placed in the back and sides of the room. Wealthy students occupied the front and center seats. Sarah scheduled a meeting with Mrs. Moore to discuss the observation. Mrs. Moore arrived at Sarah's office looking defensive. I assume you're here to criticize my teaching, Mrs. Moore said as she sat down. I'm here to discuss patterns I observed in your classroom, Sarah replied. She slid the report across the desk. You called on wealthy students 18 times in one class period. You did not call on scholarship students at all, even when they raised their hands. Your seating arrangement places scholarship students in the least visible areas of the classroom. Mrs. Moore glanced at the report and pushed it back. That's cherry-picking data from one class period. You can't draw conclusions from such a small sample. You're right, Sarah agreed. So I reviewed your grade books from the past 5 years. I looked at every student's grades, their background, and their outcomes. She pulled out another document. Scholarship students in your classes receive lower grades on average than wealthy students, even when their standardized test scores are similar. Scholarship students are less likely to be recommended for advanced placement courses, and scholarship students report feeling unwelcome in your classroom. The evidence was overwhelming. Mrs. Moore stared at the documents without speaking. Sarah continued. I also interviewed former students. I put out a request on social media asking anyone who attended Riverside Prep in the past 10 years to share their experiences. I received responses from 42 students. 6 of them specifically mentioned you as a teacher who treated scholarship students unfairly. "This is a witch hunt," Mrs. Moore said. Her voice shook. "You came here with a vendetta against me because of what happened 10 years ago. You're twisting data to make me look bad." "The data speaks for itself," Sarah said calmly. "This isn't about what happened between us 10 years ago. This is about a pattern of behavior that has harmed dozens of students over many years. You have been teaching with bias, whether conscious or unconscious, and it needs to stop." Mrs. Moore stood up abruptly. "I've given 30 years to this school. I've taught hundreds of students. I've won teaching awards. And now you're going to destroy my career because I hurt your feelings a decade ago." "This isn't about my feeling," Sarah said. "This is about the students you've hurt with your bias. The students who didn't get recommendations they deserved. The students who gave up on advanced classes because you made them feel stupid. The students who left Riverside Prep because teachers like you made them feel they didn't belong. I want to appeal this to the board," Mrs. Moore said. "You don't have the authority to destroy my career based on your biased interpretation of data." "You have the right to appeal," Sarah agreed, "but I should tell you that I've already shared my findings with Headmaster Chen and the board. They've asked me to continue the investigation. They want me to interview more former students and review complaints that were filed but never properly addressed." Mrs. Moore's face went pale. "What complaints?" Sarah opened a file on her computer. "It turns out that over the past 15 years, 12 formal complaints were filed against you by students or parents. All of them alleged discrimination or unfair treatment. All of them were dismissed by the previous administration without proper investigation. The complainants were all scholarship students or students of color." The room was silent except for the sound of Mrs. Moore's heavy breathing. 2 weeks later, Sarah presented her full report to the Riverside Prep Academy Board of Trustees. The report was 50 pages long, with appendices containing student interviews, grade analysis, and documentation of complaints. Headmaster Chen and Mrs. Moore were both present at the meeting. Sarah walked the board through her findings systematically. She showed them the data on grade distributions. She shared quotes from student interviews. She explained how Mrs. Moore's bias had affected not just individual students, but the school's reputation and enrollment numbers. Parents from diverse backgrounds were avoiding Riverside Prep specifically because of its reputation for discrimination. "The evidence shows a clear pattern spanning more than a decade," Sarah concluded. "Mrs. Moore's teaching practices have violated school policies on equal treatment and created a hostile environment for scholarship students and students of color. This has resulted in legal liability for the school and damage to its mission and reputation." One board member, a lawyer, spoke up. "Dr. Martinez, this is serious. Are you recommending termination?" Sarah paused. She looked at Mrs. Moore, who sat with her head down, avoiding eye contact. "I'm recommending that Mrs. Moore be given a choice. She can resign with full retirement benefits and a neutral reference letter, or she can accept a demotion to teaching assistant with mandatory bias training, regular supervision, and probationary status for 2 years. Either way, she cannot continue in her current position as department head and senior faculty member." Mrs. Moore finally looked up. Her eyes were red. "You've destroyed me," she said to Sarah. "I hope you're satisfied." "I'm not satisfied," Sarah replied. "I'm sad. Sad that you had 30 years to examine your own bias and chose not to. Sad that you hurt so many students who deserve better. Sad that it took someone you victimized coming back with power to stop you." She paused. "But I'm also hopeful. Hopeful that Riverside Prep can change. Hopeful that future students won't experience what I experienced. Hopeful that education can be truly equal." The board voted unanimously to accept Sarah's recommendations. Mrs. Moore chose to resign. She left Riverside Prep 3 weeks later. Some of her longtime colleagues threw her a small retirement party. Sarah did not attend. She was too busy interviewing candidates for the new English department head position. The story of what happened at Riverside Prep spread through education circles. News articles were written about the scholarship student who returned as an administrator to address the discrimination she had faced. Sarah gave interviews about systemic bias in elite schools. Her story inspired other educators to examine their own practices. Enrollment at Riverside Prep increased by 30% over the next 2 years. More families from diverse backgrounds applied. The school implemented Sarah's full reform program. Teacher training became mandatory. Student feedback was taken seriously. Grade distributions were monitored for bias. The school's reputation transformed from elitist to inclusive. Sarah stayed at Riverside Prep for 5 years. She rebuilt the entire academic culture. She mentored dozens of scholarship students. She hired teachers who shared her commitment to equity. And she made sure that every single student, regardless of their background or their parents' income, received the same respect and opportunities. On her last day at Riverside Prep, Sarah walked past the English classroom where Mrs. Moore had humiliated her 16 years earlier. A new teacher, a young black woman from a public university, was teaching a diverse group of students. Sarah watched through the window as the teacher called on every raised hand and encouraged every voice. The teacher saw Sarah watching and waved. Sarah waved back. Justice, Sarah had learned, wasn't about revenge. It was about creating a system where cruelty couldn't thrive. It was about turning pain into purpose. It was about making sure that the next generation of students never had to experience what she experienced. Mrs. Catherine Moore never taught again. She spent her retirement quietly, mostly alone. Her teacher friends had distanced themselves after the scandal. The education awards she once displayed in her home now sat in boxes in her garage. Sometimes she thought about Sarah Chen and wondered how a scholarship student she had dismissed had become so powerful. She never understood that power built on cruelty always crumbles, while power built on justice lasts forever. Sarah went on to become a nationally recognized education reform leader. She wrote books. She advised school districts. She trained teachers across the country. And she never forgot where she came from or why she fought so hard for students who needed someone to believe in them. If you believe that every student deserves respect regardless of their background, subscribe to the channel for more stories about justice and transformation. Share this story with educators and parents who care about creating truly equal schools. Because change happens when people who have been hurt use their pain to help others.